Hello, you listen to On Israeli-Islamist Monitor. I am Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Some of our listeners may not know this, but the current Israeli government is the first one ever to include an Arab party. And not just any Arab party, Israel's Islamist party. While this has won Israel wide praise in the Middle East and elsewhere, it's causing the government endless headaches at home. Both the opposition and some of the coalition parties are unhappy. It turns out that not everyone is wowed by the fact that the religious, kosher-eating, Sabbath-keeping Jew wears a kippah on his head and supports settlements in the West Bank is sharing power with an Arab Islamist party. The way it's looking now, Naftali Bennett's government is deadlocked. Conservative right-wing pundits and analysts insist that Knesset member Mansour Abbas, the head of the Islamic Ra'am party, speaks with a forked tongue. He sounds reasonable and pleasant when speaking Hebrew in front of the cameras and microphones, but completely different when he talks Arabic to his Islamist base. They argue that the alliance he forged with the Jewish state is a temporary ad hoc arrangement whose only goal is to gain power in order to advance the interests of the Muslim Brotherhood, weaken Israel, and turn it into a state of all its citizens, not just the Jewish state, with equal rights and equal standing for Arabs and Jews. Even Turkish President Erdogan, whose party is ideologically affiliated with the Israeli Ra'am party, is impressed by this new Israeli coalition. But its opponents at home are not to be convinced. To them, Abbas is a Trojan horse, a fifth column seeking a hostile takeover from within. One of the leading experts in this group is Reserve Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Halevi, a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and a former military intelligence officer specializing in the Middle East and radical Islam. Mr. Halevi is also leading a documentation project on anti-Semitic and anti-Israel campaigns in Canada. He'll be with us shortly.
I'm Elizabeth Hagedorn, and I'm the State Department correspondent at Al Monitor.
And I'm Joe Snell. I'm Al Monitor's video editor. Let's admit it, this past year has been difficult to stay on top of the news and sift through what's accurate and what's misleading. Let Al Monitor help you.
If you care about the Middle East and North Africa, you should consider listening to Al Monitor's audio series On the Middle East with Andrew Parasalidi and Amber and Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can now watch our newest video podcast, Reading the Middle East with Gilles Capel. You can subscribe to these series on your favorite podcast platforms.
And through a host of free daily and weekly newsletters, we offer a range of perspectives with the highest journalistic standards. You can subscribe to these newsletters at almonitor.com.
As an award-winning media service headquartered in Washington, D.C., Al Monitor has a network of over 160 contributors around the world.
So if you haven't done so already, be sure to visit almonitor.com, where you can find all of these newsletters and podcasts along with first-class reporting and analysis.
Now I'm privileged to welcome and say hello to Lieutenant Colonel Reserve and a senior researcher at the Jerusalem Center for Public Affairs and a former military intelligence officer, Jonathan Halevi. How are you, Jonathan? And thank you for joining us here in On Israel in Al Monitor. Shalom.
Thank you for having me.
And so let's go on because your opinion, we gathered here to hear your opinion, and when I'm talking to you, I see in my TV screen in Israel, Mansour Abbas is interviewed by Rina Matzliach in Meet the Press. So now I'm holding the stick on both ends, and I want to ask you first and foremost, do you see the Ra'am party's inclusion in the government as a strategic failure endangering Israel's identity as a Jewish state?
I think we have to look into this question from a different perspective, from Abbas' own perspective. And Abbas said very recently in an interview to the Washington Institute that joining the coalition is strengthening or enhancing the legitimacy, give legitimacy to Israel as a Jewish and democratic state.
So you say did he say it in Arabic interviews?
He said that in an interview with the Washington Institute, and that he said in Hebrew. It was also translated into English. It was about a week ago.
So do you think we have here a case like we suffered in the past, like Yasser Arafat? He's not terrorist, Abbas, but I guess you remember when Arafat was speaking in Arabic one thing and the totally vice versa in English or Hebrew to the Americans or the Israelis. Do you think it's a double standard, that double-faced, Abbas?
We have, if we look into the statements made by Mansour Abbas in Arabic, and that was my research was about, to analyze his statements during the last decade and try to understand on what his policy is based on. And what I found that there are two levels. One is pragmatism, no one can deny that, and also Islamism, which also it cannot be denied. And the challenge was to reconcile between these two ages, because is he sincere about pragmatism, or it just only a tactic in order to reach to his goals? And this was a very interesting research. And what I found that he said this very clearly, even after joining the coalition, that he still based his agenda, his political platform, on the basis of Islam, on the experience of Prophet Muhammed, on Hudaybiyah agreement, on all of these the policies of the Prophet Muhammad, in which he can do the ijtihad, which means he can learn from these experiences, for the strategy that was shaped by Prophet Muhammad, and gave guidance. Muhammad gave guidance to Muslims in order to follow him, to advance their goals, which means at the end of the day, the Islamic goals.
I'm not sure all of our listeners will know what do you mean. If you may just tell us a little bit about the Hudaybiyah strategy.
So Muhammad left the city of Mecca and moved to the city of Medina because he was prosecuted by the Quraysh tribe. And when he moved to Medina, he established a new society, a new state, an Islamic state, and formed a coalition with the infidels, with the Jewish tribes, in order to build a new entity. Later, he reached an agreement with the Quraysh tribe, Hudaybiyah, which is agreement for a hudna, which is a ceasefire for 10 years. And the idea behind it, it was a tactical move in order, at the end of the day, to take over Mecca. And that's exactly what he did.
Understand. Okay, many people think political Islam has many faces, and they differentiate between the northern branch of the Israeli-Islamist party that I guess is being stated out of the law in Israel, and the southern one led by Abbas, which is legitimate in Israel. Even Abbas' spiritual patrons have undergone change. Sheikh Abdallah Nimr Darwish, who founded the Islamist movement in Israel and spent time in jail for a subversive activity, became a prominent envoy of peace and reconciliation in his later years. Why do you think they cannot be believed? Why do you think it's so solid and it will not be changed through sitting together in coalitions, cooperating, living together, etc.?
the issue of believing to the other side is more complex. So we have two levels of pragmatism and Islamism. Which one should I believe in? We have to understand his statement on both levels and try to get deep into his strategy. So I just give you a few examples. So one of the senior leaders of the Islamic movement, which is the Islamic movement, the organization that has his party Ra'am in parliament, in the Israeli parliament, in the Knesset. And he described the riots in Israel in May last year as a religious war, not as grievances against discrimination and other things. No, religious war. And he said that this war is only illustration of 1% of the next religious war, the big one, in which Muslims will deport all Jews from all Palestine. So should we believe him? And we have another.
By the way, who you are talking about, by the way?
He is one of the senior leaders of the Islamic movement.
Is a Knesset member or a...
No, not a Knesset member.
Okay,
no.
Okay.
No. And another one, he's the director of the Institute for Islamic Addicts, Islamic rulings in the Islamic Party, in the Islamic movement, and southern branch, not the northern one. Another one, also very senior official, leader of the Islamic movement. He, in several occasions, prayed to Allah to destroy, to eliminate, or in relation to Al-Aqsa and in relation to Al-Quds, to Jerusalem, to eliminate till the last one. Don't spare any of them, of those who attacked and inflicted injustice on Muslims. So from the context, you can understand that he is talking about the enemies of the Muslims in Palestine. Should we believe him? So it's not just a question of believing or not believing to this statement or to that statement. We have to look into the entire picture. And for that, we have to do, that's what I did with my research, is documentation, analysis, and assessment. And in this regard, I want to mention one more thing about, you mentioned Darwish. And it is part of the documentation. In 2016, the Islamic movement held an event commemorating the achievements and his life full of struggle for Islamic values of Darwish. And in this event, the former leader of the Islamic movement, Ibrahim Abdallah Sarsour, presented a video from Abdallah Azzam. Abdallah Azzam was talking in this video. Abdallah Azzam is one of the founders of Al-Qaeda. He was a Palestinian preacher and scholar. And he presented Abdallah Azzam as one of the greatest leaders of our movement. And Abdallah Azzam in this video praised Darwish and also Ahmad Yassin as those who are leading the Islamic revolution, etc., etc. By the way, Abdallah Azzam was assassinated by the Russians in 1989.
Yes, I know.
So is that also, we should believe that as representing the Islamic movement? Or maybe the new strategy of Mansour Abbas? So there is a gap between the pragmatism and the Islamism, and we have to understand, to analyze why there is a gap and whether the Islamic movement accepts and also take new decisions, about its policy. I haven't seen that right now, so we have seen this gap between pragmatism and Islamism.
I know, I want to ask you a hard follow-up question because,
Yes.
and I know your researchers are well-known and solidly based but if I go to the other side, An Arab, an Israeli Arab or a Palestinian or a Muslim can tell me, listen, look at the Israelis, the Jewish Israelis. There is a large portion, it's getting, by the way, larger, that dreams and speaks about establishing the Bet HaMikdash, the temple. It will have to come on the place of Haram HaSharif. People are talking about the two sides of Jordan River. The promised land is in Iraq, and every side is dreaming about their wishes and dreams and prophecies and the sacred book. But the secret of life is getting pragmatist, and isn't it what we see from Abbas? Even in the very fact that he joined the coalition, that he said not long ago that Israel is a Jewish state and it is not going to be changed. And in the riots that you just mentioned, he even visited a synagogue in Lod and said that they will cooperate in renewing it, etc., etc. You just say, no, listen, this is what they really think, and that's it.
I didn't say that this is exactly what they think. I said that that's exactly what they say, and that's exactly what they mean. So we have to look first into Ra'am, the party, and into the institutions of the Islamic movement with the higher hierarchy, and look into their decision, the charter of Ra'am, and also the position of the Islamic movement, the head of the leader of the Islamic movement. So these are the people who have the authority to shape the policy. So if we want to look into signs of pragmatism and a change, I'm not talking about tactic pragmatism. We should also see that in the decision in the charter of Ra'am. So the charter talks about the struggle, the conflict, the basic conflict with the Zionist movement, and also warns the Israelis, basically warn Jews, the Israeli Jews, and advise them to remember what happened with Salah ad-Din, which means goes back to the same message that I mentioned before about the religious war. And with relation to the policy of the Islamic movement, I haven't noticed anything that changes the basics, belief in the principles of Islam, which means the Sunnah and the Quran.
I want to now to contact you to the other things that are going in the Middle East, because I want to understand if you are talking only about the inner Israeli arena with Ra'am and the Israeli Arabs, because, or you can translate your thinking to the Middle East, because the Middle East, as you know, is undergoing a process of reconciliation, maybe except of Iran. The Abraham Accords that opened doors for Israel throughout the Gulf, Morocco that signed the defense agreement with Israel, Egyptians are going out of the way to be friendly, even Erdogan, an Islamist himself, is energetically quoting Israeli President Herzog. So what do you think about the whole phenomena? And Erdogan, let's not forget, is, I think it's a sister party of Ra'am in Israel.
It's all connected to the Muslim Brotherhood in this way or another. And the center of the Muslim Brotherhood shifted from Egypt to Turkey after the revolution in 2013. And what we can see in the Middle East, there's a major change in the last decade. And it all started after Saudi Arabia and the Gulf states understood that the threats that embodied in Iran policy to the region is far more dangerous than any challenge imposed by Israel. So that's led them and other countries to work together on regional alliances against Iran. And all of them are afraid of building the Shiite crescent in the Middle East, which means connecting Iran, Iraq, Syria, and Lebanon. And we also see the involvement of Iran in in Yemen, in other parts of the world, also in Asia, etc. So they understand that this threat is real, is imminent, and you can also read, they also read the threat, the direct threat of the Saudi regime to overthrow the regime, to take over this land, the Saudi Arabia and the Gulf, and this is Bahrain, of course, and other countries are an Iranian occupied land by the Gulf states. So that opened the door for the impossible treaties, alliances between Israel and the Gulf states.
So why not think positive and say that the same happens with the Ra'am, that now he came to a conclusion that it's more important for him to act to improve the life of his voters than to go on with this jihad that, you know, right now there is no real, Israel is not under the existential threat. But you know what? I think we understood each other in this point. I want to ask you, who do you think is to be blamed for this normalization or normalizing relations with Abbas, bringing him into Israeli government? The thing that if you told me that it will happen, I guess 1 or 2 years ago, I would ask you to check yourself.
No, look, it's not a question of blaming someone for that. It's an issue of understanding how all this process has started. And to the credit of Mansour Abbas, he stated his policy from day one after he was elected to the leader of Ra'am. And he said that very clearly, that he's open to negotiate and to work together with the right wing and the left wing. And as we see, he played the cards very well. And according to him, he managed to get a better price, a better achievement, much better achievement with this coalition. So, and for him, I think that and one more thing about it, he also stated, not only him, but also others, that was the common policy of Ra'am and the Islamic movement. They wanted to overthrow Netanyahu. That was the first priority for them. And I'm not sure that these messages were well read by Israeli politicians.
What do you mean? It's interesting.
So I can describe again what they said. They said that our first priority is to get rid of Netanyahu for his right-wing government, and from his policy, he's dangerous for their cause. And that was well before or even during the negotiation with Netanyahu during the last 2 years. So this message was repeated over this period.
I'm not sure I agree with you as sitting here and covering it on a daily basis. I think that Abbas preferred Netanyahu. Abbas, the romance, the courtship, it began with Netanyahu. He was invited 4 times to the prime minister's house, and he said, and he even acted as if he prefers Netanyahu. By the way, not because of ideology, but because he believed for Netanyahu, it would be easier to give him what he needs, the billions of shekels and all the new laws, etc. Because the current government is so weak. Netanyahu if he would be able to form a government, he could be stronger and pay the payment in a more efficient way. But you are saying totally different. You are saying Abbas was such a great poker player that he wanted to look like someone that prefers Netanyahu and the right, and then in the last moment he went with the central left and right, this very strange government. Did I understand it? Did I understand you right?
That's exactly what I understand from Mahmoud Abbas' statement. So he just played like a Persian bazaar, and he managed to take the higher price with this government, and he played it very skillfully.
Yes, he is a very good player. And do you think that Abbas will have in the future significant tools with which to wield a sufficient influence on the Israeli political map that would endanger the state's Jewish identity? Is there a potential to go there?
So what is Abbas' policy? What his stand on Palestine, Eretz Israel? So Abbas does not recognize the Jewishness of the land. He even mocking Judaism for that, and he denies the Jewish relation, the historic and religious relation to the Temple Mount, to even the Wailing Wall, and the Jerusalem in general, and of course to the entire Palestine. So, and from his perspective, as he presents that, he right now accepts the reality of Israel as a Jewish state, as decided by the Jewish people, not by him. He was not asked to accept it or to recognize it. And he, as he said in his interview with the Washington Institute, he said that there will be a discussion about the identity of the Jewishness of the state. On this, and at the same time, Abbas has not concealed his position about the Zionist movement. He depicted it, and he said that our conflict, which means in that context, which means, and he said that, by the way, in Ramallah, which means of the entire Palestinian people, also those who came from Israel, is the Zionist enemy. This is his own language. And by the way, he said we came from the interior of 48. And the name of his movement is the Islamic movement in the 48 area, not in Israel, in the 48, and also other organizations that affiliated and run by the Islamic movement use the same name. The interior does not say Israel. So it's very significant. So what you ask basically is whether Mansour Abbas or the Islamic movement will support someday separatism. And that depends on many, many factors. And I believe that the most important one is the establishment of a Palestinian state in the West Bank. And that will be a huge factor that will have an impact on the relationship between minorities in Israel and the state. And of course, there's another factor here, which is also highly important, is the position of the northern branch of the Islamic movement, and specifically Raed Salah. And Raed Salah is not happy, to say the least, from the change, the pragmatic policy of Mansour Abbas. And just a week ago, he met with senior officials of the Islamic Party, basically on that. And another factor is the young generation, and that also will have an effect on the policy of the old guard of the Islamic movement.
So let's try to summarize our conversation, our very interesting conversation, in this next question, a final question, because over the years, first as an intelligence officer, and then as a journalist and a blogger, you've tried to expose what you called the true face of the Arabs in general and the Palestinians specifically. You argued that the end game of all the peace agreements that Arab states have signed with Israel is to wipe Israel off the face of the map, and yet Israel is stronger than ever. It doesn't face a real threat to its existence. Most of those who were its bitter enemies in the past are now partners in peace. Where did you go wrong, or did you? And do you still think that what we are seeing is a long campaign, overall campaign to destroy us, with a few intermissions here and there, and that Israel must not be tempted to sign peace agreements with the Arabs because it's a trap?
First, one correction. I didn't say that all peace agreements are intended to destroy Israel. I was focused on the policy of the Palestinian Authority under Yasser Arafat and Mahmoud Abbas, and presented their views, their policy, and tried to reconcile between the political level and the ideological level. So, and this is also my mission with the Islamic Party. The most important thing is, first of all, to understand what is the position of the other side. This is the intelligence assignment that I put on myself. The decision is totally different thing, and this is upon the policymakers. It's not upon myself. They can see the entire pictures, and they have so many factors that are related to it. Relationship with the US. If you want one small thing, the funding of the Iron Dome missile, for example, this is also a huge factor. Turkey, Iran, the nuclear threats. You have even politics plays in. So it's their decision of the policymakers must take so many factors into consideration, and I cannot. I will accept it. Any decision is legitimate. I'm not getting into that. I'm only focused on the intelligence side. There is only one factor in making decisions. And also another factor which is highly important is the national resilience of the Israeli people. And that you saw in 2000 when Ehud Barak pulled out of Lebanon, because that was a major factor. Israel could not anymore stayed in the same position, in military position in Lebanon. So we have so many factors. Each one of the decisions that are made by the government is, of course, legitimate when they take the entire picture. I only contributed in one specific area, which is an effort to understand the positions of Mansour Abbas and the Islamic Party, and try to reconcile between pragmatism and Islamism.
And I assure you, it's very interesting. The situation, as you know, is so complex, and no one has, the final truth. But by any means, I enjoyed it very much. And I want to thank you, Jonathan Halevi, for this conversation, joining us here on Israel. Thank you very much. And we'll be right back after this short break. Thank you, Jonathan. Toda.
Hello, I'm Gilles Kepel, professor at Sciences Po and Normal Sup in Paris, and author of a number of books and articles on the Middle East. Through my new podcast, Reading the Middle East, on the award-winning media service and Monitor, we will take a deep dive into the trends in the region with the authors and thought leaders who are shaping how we think about the Middle East. Reading the Middle East will be a fantastic addition to Al Monitor's outstanding podcast lineup, including On the Middle East with Andrew Paraziliti and Amber Zaman, and On Israel with Ben Caspit. You can subscribe on your favorite listening platforms. We look forward to your joining our conversation.
Thank you for staying with us. This was a different conversation. If you're following this podcast, you know that our guests' opinions are not familiar or too common here on Israel, but it's still very interesting. And when asking Lieutenant Colonel Jonathan Halevi if he believes Mansour Abbas from Ra'am, he said that the issue of believing is complex. It's not a question of believe this guy or the other guy. It's a question of trying to understand from within the complex situation. And he quoted one of the senior leaders in Ra'am, in the Islamist movement, this Israeli Arab party that is in the Israeli coalition these days, that described during the riots in May, where when a lot of Israeli Arabs were rioting against their neighbors, the Jews, that he described it as a religious war. And not only a religious war, he said that it resembles only it's an illustration of 1% of the real war, the real religious war that will follow up in the future. So Halevi's case is actually saying that we have to look at the entire picture, not a case of believing this guy or the other guy. And I think he's talking about us telling ourselves a story and believing the story that we are telling ourselves, instead of looking at the hard evidence. And he also said that he's not seeing a real change in the Ra'am party's ideology. And they're still advising Israelis all the time to remember Salah ad-Din, that was the Muslim commander that kicked the Christians from the Middle East. Another thing that Jonathan Halevi said and told us that from the Mansour Abbas's own perspective, joining the coalition in Israel is even the very fact that Muslims are in the Israeli coalition is hurting the legitimacy of Israel as a Jewish state. And Halevi also said that two things cannot be denied. The pragmatism. We see pragmatism in Mansour Abbas. It's undeniable. But also the Islamism. And the challenge is to reconcile or try to reconcile between these two pillars. And Halevi is not sure that the final result will be what we are aiming at. And the core of the Halevi theory is that the base, or his research showed that the base of the agenda, even now, of Abbas and his party, is the Hudaybiyah, the prophecies of Muhammad, that actually the analyzing it is that we are now making peace with you in order to fight you later when we will be stronger. So I hope later we will have a different and brighter future, and I hope you found this conversation interesting, and I'll try to find you here next week in the same place at the same time on Israel and Monitor. I'm Ben Caspit from Tel Aviv. Thank you. Take care. Bye-bye.